of our students met, they had two goals. So they would check in first thing in the morning, which is their 8:30 time. Then we have a pretty long morning, so they would check in again at 11 o'clock. That would be like their midday check-in, and then they checked in again at 3 o'clock, which is our end of the day check-in. And if they met their 80% time of meeting that expectation, then they were able to get their goal. And some of their goal examples were like free computer time, free iPad time, something that was not something that is cost efficient for teachers, something that's not going to cause disruption in the classroom, or that would take a significant amount of time away from instruction, because of course our goal is to keep them in the room for instruction. So at every check-in time, when they met with me, I was looking for, are they meeting the goal? How often are they meeting these goals? And which goals are they meeting? Are they meeting only one of them, both of them? And we can kind of use that to determine where we need to go from there. I also really wanted to look at the comments from staff, which you can see on the previous one here. There are comments from the staff. Those comments were really useful in determining whether we needed to change the goals of the students. For example, the previous comment was about how we might need to add something about impulsive behaviors, and his goals were to stay on task and stay in his area. So that might be something we put on our SPS minutes for the next round after he meets these expectations. So at the end of the day, the chart is kept by the individual teacher, and then I weekly input all the data into a chart, which then put it into a graph, and continue to meet with the SPS team every 4 to 6 weeks to review that data. This is our baseline where we kind of started. So over here, this little itty bitty blocks, these are the average incidence of these 3 behaviors that we're looking at, off task, respect, or out of area, for the rest of the class, so those other 21 students. So an example, only a quarter of one student, so about 0.25 of a student would have an off-task incident in any given week in November. It was just a random week. Where you can see the student A had 3 incidences in that 1 week, so that was an issue for him. Where you can see his out of area was up to 6 incidences a week. So this is how we chose the goals in the SPS meeting as to what goals would go on their individual charts. There's also some information here at the bottom that is individualized to each individual student. These are things that could influence their behavior throughout the day. So for example, student X, we currently know lives with dad and stepmom. He lives with dad and stepmom because he was traumatically taken away from mom the previous year, and this has dramatically influenced his education habits and behavior habits within the classroom. So this is student A, and this is his goal for on task. So we started the behavior chart on November 11th, so implementation is at the star here. So everything on this side is prior to the intervention, and the blue is our morning, orange is afternoon. So you'll see that prior to the intervention, we were bobbling right around this 40% of time on task range, where after the intervention, you'll see a dramatic increase right away. Usually they get very excited about the chart. He was wanted to get the reward, so immediately a few days after, it was a huge thing for him and he loved it. And then you'll see it kind of goes up and down. You'll also see a huge dip right in the middle at November 30th. That's the day we came back to school after Thanksgiving break. So after a break, there was a huge decrease in his on-task goal as well. This is the same student with his second goal of staying in area. So again, we're kind of going to see the start implementation. Everything before that is without the intervention. So we are still below that 80% line here. After the intervention, again, we see a huge spike, and then it kind of goes up and down. And still at November 30th, you'll see a pretty large decrease, especially in the afternoons. For student A, though, looking at his before intervention, he was only on task for about 28.5% of the day. And then after the intervention, he was able to get to over 83% of his day on task, which is proficiency. So there was a lot of growth here. Throughout his data collection, Tuesdays and Thursdays remained to be his best days. He is very excited about being home. He has a very strong family connection. So Mondays could have been very difficult for him because he is now back at school and away from his family. And of course, Fridays can be difficult because we get very antsy and we want to get home and spend time with our family. So that's probably part of that. Also looking at the intervention data or the behavior data from prior to the intervention, you'll notice that mornings were very difficult for him staying in his area. Now math is what we have in the morning. It's a very large block. And he is in a remedial math class, so a lot of that may have been him getting up, moving around the room to try to get help, because there are a lot of adults in that room at one time. But he was able to get up to proficiency with both of his goals using this intervention. Student X is the second student I looked at. We again started this chart on November 11th, so you'll see the star implementation there. Again, before the intervention is in front of the star. Everything else behind is after the intervention. Again, there's still a large jump here with the implementation. They do get excited about having the chart and earning these rewards at first. And then you'll see he has a lot of up and downs here. He has a dip after Thanksgiving break. It's not as significant as some of the other students, but his data does seem to be the most up and down. He also had Tuesdays and Wednesdays kind of being his worst days, where maybe it's midweek, so he could have come in the beginning of the week ready to go and then gets tired and kind of bogged down middle of the week, and then at the end of the week he might be able to see the light and he gets more energy to maybe stay on task a little bit longer. But if you look at his next goal of being respectful, you'll still see that it was lower prior to the intervention. After the intervention, it's definitely higher. It has less up and downs than the previous goal of his. Tuesdays and Wednesdays still remain his worst days here. However, the really interesting thing to look at is that after Thanksgiving break here, he had a very, very little dip in his percentage of time being respectful. And his morning was a little rougher than the afternoon, but he was able to obtain that percentage of time being respectful quite quickly after the break. So before the intervention for student X, he was spending about 22% of his day on task, and afterwards he got up to 78.8% of his day on task. Still not at proficiency, but obviously it is a significant increase. He was about 19 to 20% of his day being respectful. He got up to almost 90% of his day being respectful, which was great for him because, like we talked about before, he does have a traumatic past. He has a very difficult time showing respect, especially to women, which are both of his teachers were women. His respect did seem to be worse in the morning, and again, math is in the morning. He started in a remedial math class that has lots of adults. All of the adults are women, so he maybe had an issue with that respect being around so many of them. As he started to increase his time on task, his grades started to improve, and so he was able to actually move to the next math class, which only had one teacher in it, so that also could contribute to his increase of percentage of time being respectful. Our last student here is student J. This is the girl. She does have an IEP for speech and reading and math. And again, her chart starts on November 11th. Her mornings are the blue ones. They seem to be a lot more consistent than in the afternoons. Tuesdays and Wednesdays remained her worst, so she was better again like student X in the beginning and afternoon. She still had a pretty large dip after break. However, it wasn't the largest dip that she's had. Still a pretty good jump with implementation, not quite as significant as the jump the boys had, but it did still jump here right afterwards. And you'll notice on her percentage of time meeting the expectations, she started at almost 38 to 28% of her mornings and afternoons staying in her area. And then after the intervention, it definitely increased to almost 80 and 74%, but we still did not reach proficiency for staying in her area during this cycle. She also had the goal of respect, and again, it started on November 11th. Everything before is prior to the intervention. It looks pretty consistent for morning and afternoon based on the way it worked for her. Her mornings were obviously better. Afterwards, though, you'll notice after the intervention that her afternoons became better. This student actually changed reading classes, readings in the afternoon. So she actually changed reading classes right after implementation around this November 18th time. So she had a new reading teacher, and as the school year goes on, it's just difference of relationships, probably building that relationship with the teacher, and also changing teachers. Maybe she was having issues with the other reading teacher. So this could all contribute to her increase in percentage of time being respectful as well. She did get, though, to proficiency in her afternoon time, which again is where she had her largest increase. So kind of looking at her summary here, she spent 33% of her day in area prior to the intervention, and afterwards, when we said she did not get to proficiency, she got very close, though, at almost 77% of her time of the day in her area. 37% of her time being respectful prior to the intervention. Then after the implementation of the behavior chart, she was able to get up to over 82% of her day being respectful, which is over proficiency level. The start and end of her week started being better than her middle of the week after the intervention. So her days of weeks also shifted with that intervention chart. And that could be because she comes in on Monday and she hasn't had the chart for a couple days, and so she could get excited about it again or getting those rewards. And then of course at the end of the week, Fridays are always more fun days because we get to go home for the weekend. This is a look at each individual student based on their goal. So what students had that goal. So student A and student X had a goal of on task. And the blue is how they were doing before, percentage of time on task, and orange is after the intervention. So you can see the significant changes from prior to intervention to after the intervention for all three goals here. Because there is an increase, a percentage of time meeting these expectations, that would mean that there's a decrease then in these level 2 behaviors, which is what we were looking for. However, we have to keep in mind that it's not just the actual chart that is having an effect on these students. Some of these students started family therapy, they started personal therapy, some of them changed classes, they had better relationships with some staff members over others. There are also some students that just their interventions, not just behavior but academically as well, also changed, so that could influence their behavior as well. This was really interesting. I wanted to look at how long it took for this intervention to show consistency among students. So this is our days to consistency, and then I wanted to look specifically after breaks, because it always seems to be an issue for us. Once we get going really well, then students go home and they degress when they come back. So for staying on task, it took an average of 11 days for our students to get to 80% consistency, meeting that expectation. A little less for staying in area, and it took the longest for being respectful. However, if we look at the days after break, it took the least amount of days to get that back up to consistency with the being respectful goal. So it maybe took longer to get there, but it's the easiest one to keep going. Where staying on task and staying in area took about 2 to 2.5 days to get them back on track. And this is looking at the rate of change between November and December. So this chart started, remember, in November 11th, and we went through December here. So if you look at, this is the other 21 students in the class. Obviously, they're also going to have a rate of change because as the school year goes on, all the students understand the expectations more, they know what to expect, and that will also show some change. But the other students in the class showed a 70% change, whereas our group of intervention students who we're looking at, or this is staying in our area, had a 92% change. There's a significant greater change with our intervention students than with our general population. Here's off task. Again, we had a 24% change in the the other students in the classroom, and then an 89% change with our intervention group. So again, a significantly different change or decrease in these incidences. And for respect, there wasn't much of a change with the other students in the classroom. However, if you look over here, we had our greatest change, our largest decrease of incidences with our respect goal. So we started at about 3.33 incidences on any given week, and we went down to about 0.3. So that was a huge change at 91%. So this is really where we want to stop, and we want to talk about what we could do from here. So what these next steps will be.